الحمد لله نحمده سبحانه وتعالى ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله حق تقاته ولا تموتن إلا وأنتم مسلمون بسم الله. We begin in the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, praising Him, thanking Him, bearing witness that there's no God but Him, and that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is His last and final messenger, and advising one another to taqwa. Last week was Eid al-Adha, and one of the things I was reflecting on, as it's, I believe it's relevant to the current COVID crisis and physical distancing that we have, is a dua that Ibrahim alayhi salam made when he left his family in the barren valley of Becca, now Mecca. The scene is such that there's, of course, it's not like now. There's no food there. There's no water yet. There's no community. But most importantly, there's no people. And one of the things that Ibrahim knows about the human condition that's necessary is that people need people, right? And so when he makes dua, one of the first things that he asks for is فَجَعَلْ أَفْئِدَةً مِنَ النَّاسِ تَهْوِي إِلَيْهِمْ, right? Such a beautiful dua. Oh Allah, make people's hearts incline. Tahwi is to incline towards something. And so he's asking for people's hearts all throughout the peninsula to incline towards his family, the place where he left them, so that his family can have a social community. They can have connections with other human beings, because it's just a part of what makes a healthy human being, is to have connections, is to be socially connected. But also mentally connected, psychologically connected. And as human beings, one of the roots of the word insan in the Arabic language is just ins, right, which means to be with someone. So it's a natural part of our human condition that we need to be with other human beings, right? It's very much a need. And so one of the challenges of this epidemic, or this pandemic, is the constant messaging of physical distancing, which is important, but that shouldn't cause us to become socially isolated, right? Because social isolation is very much a spiritual danger, right? Physical distancing is possible, but it doesn't mean that we have to be socially disconnected, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِهِمْ. Allah is the one who allafa. Allaf, ta'lif is to take multiple things that are scattered in different directions and places and to bring them all together, right? Allah says He did that with the hearts of the believers. And one of the things that Rasulullah says when He used to stand the believers up in a line to pray is وَلَا تَخْتَلِفُوا فَاخْتَلِفَ قُلُوبُكُمْ. Don't differ in your line, because if you differ, your hearts will differ. And there's a subtle suggestion there that if you're physically off, right, if you're too physically separate, then your hearts can become separate as well. And so that's a danger that we have to kind of keep in mind. And it just means that we have to be creative, and we have to be thinking out of the box in ways that we as a community we can preserve this need to stay socially connected, mentally connected, psychologically connected, and most importantly, spiritually connected with one another, even if we're going to do different things to stay physically distant with one another. One of the beautiful ahadith that Rasulullah says is a parable of believers, and he says, مَثَلُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ فِي تَوَاضِّهِمْ وَتَرَاحُمِهِمْ وَتَعَاطُفِهِمْ كَمَثَلِ الْجَسَدِ. The example of the believers and how they love one another, how they're merciful to one another, but also ta'atufihim, how they're empathetic and emotionally bound to one another. Look at the implication here with the constant distancing that we have to deal with in this time. He says the example of the believers and how they're like this with one another, كَمَثَلِ الْجَسَدِ, is like a body, right? Like a physical body. And if one part of the body is afflicted with illness, تَدَعَى لَهُ سَائِرُ الْجَسَدِ بِالسَّهْرِ وَالْحَمَى, the rest of the body will stay up at night it'll get a fever, it'll do something to let everyone else know that one part is hurt, right? Because the whole body, it has this sense of interconnectedness, and the ummah is supposed to have that sense of interconnectedness as well, globally, nationally, locally. As an ummah, there should always be this sense of interconnectedness. And finally, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran at the end of Surah Ali Imran, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu wattaqullah. O you who believe, be patient, meaning be patient, you individually. Every believer has to be patient. Wasabiru, which is mufa'ala, which means vie with one another in patience or help one another in patience, as you yourself are individually patient, help each other in patience as well, but also rabitu. And that comes from murabata, which is be connected, right? Connect with one another, right? Because if you're not, you won't be able to be patient. We say in our dua every day in Surah Fatiha, Ihdina siratal mustaqim. Guide us, not guide me, guide us, plural, community, right? To the straight path. Why? Because the more people that are guided to the straight path, the stronger the community is, the easier it is for you to stay on the path as well. So as we struggle with this pandemic and we struggle to stay physically distanced, we have to be creative and find more and more ways to be socially, mentally, spiritually, and psychologically connected. If you haven't talked to a family member in some time, now is the time to pick up the phone, give them a call, form a connection, right? وَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ الَّذِي تَسَأَلُونَ بِهِ وَالْأَرْحَمَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be conscientious of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but also the wombs that bore you, right? And be conscientious of those connections. Form the connection now. If you're physically distant, form the verbal connection at least, and there's all kinds of Skype and Zoom halaqas and classes going on in the community, the different masajid right now. Even if it's not something that you're interested in, tune into one of these every now and then and listen to a talk, but also connect with some of the other people that are on that program as well. You'll see other programs in the community, and to the extent that we can, maybe being outside or something, to do activities together as a community in a way that's safe. We should be doing that in a limited capacity, of course, in whatever way that maintains the recommendations of the CDC. But the bottom line is, as a Muslim community, as a human community, social connectedness is a real need, and there's a real risk of that being lost through the messaging of physical distancing. And there's a real danger to our spiritual health if that happens. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He give us creativity, energy, motivation, and ambition to come together in whatever way we can, mentally, psychologically, spiritually, over the internet, over the phone, in outdoor spaces that are safe, to maintain those connections together as a community and slowly beat this virus. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq in doing that. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله فاستغفروه إنه كان غفارا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.